Have you ever stopped, even for a second, to think about just how much of your life, your sensitive data, your finances, maybe even your company's biggest secrets, now lives with online services?
It's almost everything these days, isn't it?
It really is. We just, sign up, click agree, usually without reading, let's be honest. And we just sort of trust.
Right. Implicit trust.
But what's actually going on behind that digital curtain, to make sure that trust is actually deserved? How do these companies prove they're not just like crossing their fingers, but really handling our valuable stuff with the integrity and security we expect?
That's the million-dollar question, really.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. This is where we peel back those complex layers to find the essential nuggets of knowledge, the surprising stuff, the vital insights, all aimed at making you instantly more clued in.
Getting you up to speed fast.
Exactly. And today, we're diving deep into the fascinating, but often pretty unseen world of SOC engagements. That's SOC, Service Organization Control Engagements.
Sounds a bit technical, I know.
It does. It sounds like a mouthful, but honestly, getting your head around it is absolutely fundamental to digital trust today.
It really underpins so much.
Our mission today, pretty straightforward. We want to demystify what these SOC things actually are, break down who's supposed to do what, and crucially explain why they matter so much for trust and transparency in, this super interconnected world we live in.
Yeah, we've got some great source material here that really lays out the nitty-gritty of the planning and risk assessment side of these audits. It's pretty detailed stuff.
Think of it like this, maybe. A SOC engagement is kind of like a really thorough head-to-toe health checkup for a company's internal systems.
That's a good analogy, especially if that company handles sensitive information for other businesses, or often directly for you.
Right, like your bank, your cloud storage, email, maybe even your favorite online shop.
Exactly. So we're going to explore the roles here. You've got the patient.
Yeah.
That's the service organization providing the service, and the doctor, the independent service auditor doing the checking up. It's all about that critical examination.
Okay, so by the end of this deep dive, you won't just know the acronym SOC. You should have a really clear picture of this sort of intricate dance between the service organizations and their auditors. You'll get the differences between the types of SOC reports and really appreciate why this whole process is just foundational for how businesses safely interact and share data now. It's like the hidden plumbing of digital trust.
The invisible architecture. I like that.
Okay, let's dive in and unpack this. So let's start right at the core of a SOC engagement. Who actually does what? You might think it's just, an auditor comes in, looks around, ticks some boxes.
Yeah, the classic audit image.
But our sources show it's way more collaborative than that. It's like a partnership, right?
Yeah.
Established from the very beginning. It's not just a casual chat, is it? Sounds like a really deliberate setup.
Oh, absolutely. It's very deliberate. That initial communication, it's paramount. The service auditor is actually required by standards to get a clear understanding of responsibilities with the service organization's management before they even agree to take the job on.
Okay, so it's not optional.
Not at all. Think of it like building a house. You need that blueprint meeting first, right? Who's responsible for the foundation? Who's doing the wiring? Who signs off? You have to agree on who does what before you pour any concrete. Otherwise, it's chaos.
Right. Misunderstandings, delays.
Exactly. Delays, cost overruns. Maybe the house isn't even sound. Same principle here. Without that upfront clarity on who's responsible for, say, describing the system versus testing the controls, the whole audit could just go off the rails.
And part of that initial agreement you mentioned is finding the right people inside the company.
Yes, precisely. You can't just grab anyone in the hallway. The auditor needs to make sure they're dealing with the folks in management or governance who have the actual responsibilities and, importantly, the deep knowledge about the systems and processes being audited.
The decision makers.
The decision makers, the process owners, the people who really know how things work day to day. It ensures the auditor is getting accurate information and not, wasting time talking to someone who doesn't have the full picture or the authority to provide what's needed. Straight to the source.
Okay, so it's a partnership, but it definitely sounds like management isn't just sitting back and relaxing. They've got some real heavy lifting to do here. Significant responsibilities all the way through.
Oh, absolutely. They are very active players. Their responsibilities are pretty extensive, quite specific. And sometimes they differ a little depending on if it's a SOC1 or SOC2 report, for example. But there are definitely some major common threads. Let's imagine a hypothetical company, maybe Cloud Secure Services. If they want a SOC2 report, Their management team is going to be incredibly busy.
Okay, so what's first on their list?
First and foremost, management has to define the scope. This is huge. It sets the exact boundaries of what the audit will cover.
So what gets looked at and what doesn't?
Precisely. For Cloud Secure, is it all their cloud services? Or just the part handling, say, financial data for banks? For a SOC 1 report, which focuses on financial reporting controls for user entities, management has to pinpoint which specific services, functions, business units, or even applications are relevant to their clients' financial statements.
So it's very targeted for SOC 1.
Very targeted on financial impact. They also need to check if they have any contracts forcing them to get a certain report type, like a Type 1 or Type 2, and maybe how often they need it. And interestingly, for companies doing this year after year, looking at last year's report is often the easiest place to start defining the scope for the next one.
Saves reinventing the wheel.
Exactly. Then, management has to choose the report type and the period it covers. Is Cloud Secure going for a Type 1 report? That's like a snapshot, right? Are the controls designed properly as of December 31st?
Just one moment in time.
Just one moment. Or are they going for a Type 2 report? That covers a period, usually, 6 months, maybe 12. And it looks not just at the design, but did the controls actually work effectively over that whole period?
That sounds like more work.
It is significantly more work for both management and the auditor. But it also provides much stronger assurance to the users of the report because it shows the controls were actually operating day in, day out.
Yeah.
Not just designed well on paper.
Makes sense. What else is on management's plate?
Okay, a really critical one today,
Is
dealing with subservice organizations. This is massive because almost everyone relies on third parties now.
like using AWS or Azure or a separate data center.
Exactly. Cloud Secure's management must figure out if any other companies are involved in delivering parts of the service that are relevant to Cloud Secure's clients. If they use, say, DataHost Inc. for their servers, they have a decision.
Okay, what's the decision?
They choose one of two ways to present DataHost in their SOC report. They can use the carve-out method. This basically means DataHost's controls are excluded from Cloud Secure's report. Cloud Secure describes what DataHost does, but says, hey, user entity, you need to get assurance over DataHost's controls yourself.
So passing the buck, sort of.
Well, it puts the onus on the user entity. The other option is the inclusive method. Here, DataHost's relevant controls are included right within Cloud Secure's SOC report.
Ah, so it's all in one package.
All in one package. But, and this is key, if they go inclusive, DataHost must agree to participate. They have to let Cloud Secure's auditor examine their controls too. That requires cooperation, transparency. It can be complex to arrange.
I can imagine. Okay, what else?
For SOC 1 and SOC, management is also responsible for describing their system. This is a huge task. They have to write up a complete, accurate, and fairly presented description of how Cloud Secure service actually works.
The blueprint again?
Exactly. The detailed blueprint and operating manual. What infrastructure, what software, who does what, how data flows. It's a foundational document the auditor relies heavily on. And management has to have a reasonable basis for claiming this description is accurate.
So they can't just wing it.
Definitely not. Now, interestingly, for SOC 3 report, that's the more general, publicly shareable version management, doesn't prepare that super detailed system description. The final report is much more high level.
Got it. Anything specific just for SOC 1?
Yes, for SOC 1, management also has to select the criteria and specify the control objectives. They state these in their assertion, their formal statement, and make sure the criteria are appropriate. They list out the objectives their controls aim to achieve, like maybe ensuring accurate payroll calculations. And they have to note if any objectives are required by law or regulation.
Okay. And then linking controls to those objectives.
Precisely. Management must identify the risks that could stop them from achieving those control objectives for SOC 1, or meeting their service commitments and system requirements for SOC 2 through 3. Then, crucially, they have to design, implement, and document the controls intended to mitigate those risks.
So find the potential problems, build the solutions.
Find the problems, build the solutions, write down how the solutions work. And for Type 2 reports, ensure those solutions are actually working effectively over time. This is the heart of internal control design. For Cloud Secure, it's identifying risks like unauthorized data access, then designing controls like multi-factor authentication, and conducting regular access reviews.
So they're essentially presenting this whole package to the auditor. Here's our system, here's what it's supposed to achieve, here are the risks, and here are the controls we built. That sounds like a lot they're claiming. How does the auditor verify all that?
Well, management formalizes their claims in that written assertion we mentioned. It's their official statement that accompanies the system description, for SOC 12, or outlines boundaries and commitments for SOC 3. They provide this assertion and the description to their user entities. It's management putting their signature on it saying, yes, we attest that this is accurate and complete to the best of our knowledge.
A formal declaration.
A very formal declaration. And to help the auditor verify it, management has to provide access and representations. This means opening the doors, basically. Full access to all relevant information records, logs, contracts, internal audit reports, everything the auditor asks for.
No secrets.
Ideally, no secrets relevant to the audit scope. They also have to make their personnel available for interviews and questions. Then at the very end, they provide formal written representations, a letter confirming key information provided during the audit and stating that they've disclosed everything material. For Cloud Secure, this means full cooperation.
Okay. What about using internal auditors? Can the external auditor rely on them?
They can sometimes. If the service auditor plans to use Cloud Secure's internal audit team for direct assistance, maybe testing certain controls, then Cloud Secure's management must provide a written acknowledgement. This statement confirms that the internal auditors will follow the external auditor's instructions and that management won't interfere with their work for the external auditor.
Preserving independence.
Exactly. It keeps the lines clear and maintains the integrity of the external audit work.
Okay, this next one sounds really important based on the sources. The disclosure of issues.
Oh, this is huge. It really speaks to the transparency required. Management has a critical responsibility to disclose known issues to the service auditor. This isn't about just showing the good stuff. It's about revealing the problems, too.
Skeletons out of the closet.
Pretty much. They need to tell the auditor about any known incidents of non-compliance with laws or regulations, any fraud they're aware of, or any uncorrected misstatements in the system description that aren't trivial. They also have to disclose any suspected or alleged intentional wrongdoing that could affect the system or controls. And it goes further. They need to reveal any known deficiencies in the design of controls, instances where controls fail to operate as described, and any significant events happening after the reporting period but before the auditor issues their report that could impact management's assertion. That level of required disclosure is intense, but it's precisely what gives the auditor's final opinion its weight and trustworthiness.
Wow. Okay, that is a lot on management's shoulders. It really drives home that they're not just bystanders here. They're deeply involved, shaping the whole thing.
Couldn't agree more. It's a massive undertaking for them.
So we've got a good picture of management's role, their exhaustive duties. But what about the service auditor, the doctor in our health check analogy? What's their main goal here? What's their mission in this whole process?
The service auditor's primary objective is actually quite focused. It's all about obtaining reasonable assurance. That term, reasonable assurance, is key.
Meaning it's not an absolute guarantee.
Exactly. It's not like certifying a product is 100% perfect. It means they've done enough work, gathered enough appropriate evidence to be highly confident, but not certain that, in all material respects, 1. Management's description of Cloud Secure's system fairly presents how it was designed and implemented, as of a date for Type 1 or throughout a period for Type 2.
Okay, the description is fair.
2. That the controls mentioned were suitably designed to achieve the stated control objectives or service commitments.
Designed properly.
And 3, specifically for those Type 2 reports, that those controls actually operated effectively over the specified period. Did they work in practice?
Got it. Description, design, and for Type 2, operating effectiveness.
You nailed it. And then, after doing all that work and forming an opinion, the auditor's final objective is to report on their findings according to the professional standards.
Ew.
It's about communicating that level of assurance they obtained.
So how do they start? What happens during the planning phase?
The planning phase is absolutely critical. It sets the stage for everything that follows. The auditor has several key responsibilities here. First, they have to decide whether to even accept or continue the engagement.
They can say no.
Oh, definitely. They assess if they have the right expertise for Cloud Secure's specific industry or technology, if they have enough staff available, and crucially, they perform initial checks on their own independence. We'll talk more about that, but if they're not independent, they generally can't take the job.
Okay. What else in planning?
Second, they must formally agree on the terms of the engagement with management. This gets documented usually in an engagement letter. It spells out the objectives, the scope, management's responsibilities, the auditor's responsibilities, the criteria being used, like the trust services criteria, and the form of the final report. Everyone needs to be crystal clear on the rules of the game.
No surprises later.
Exactly. And third, They need to reach an understanding with management about that written assertion management will provide. The auditor needs to know what management intends to assert because the whole audit is geared towards examining that assertion.
Makes sense. Does the planning differ much between, say, a SOC1 and a SOC2?
It does in terms of focus. For a SOC1 engagement, remember, it's about controls relevant to user entities' financial reporting. So the auditor's planning focuses heavily on assessing the risk of material misstatement, specifically related to those financial controls at Cloud Secure. They need a deep understanding of Cloud Secure's system as it pertains to financial processing, and they need to evaluate if the criteria management shows are suitable for that purpose.
All about the money trail.
Pretty much. For SOC2 and SOC3 engagements, the focus broadens. It's about the trust services criteria, security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, privacy. Here, the auditor's planning involves establishing an overall strategy for the engagement. This strategy guides everything: the scope, timing, direction, resource allocation. It includes performing risk assessment procedures to understand Cloud Secure's system and how its controls meet the service commitments and system requirements based on those chosen trust services criteria. It's a wider lens.
Okay, so the auditor decides to take the job. They've agreed on the terms with Cloud Secure's management. It sounds like this agreement isn't just a handshake, it becomes a very formal arrangement. What exactly makes it so formal?
It's extremely formal because, as I mentioned, a SOC engagement is a specific type of audit called an assertion-based examination engagement. This means it falls under rigorous professional standards, specifically the attestation standards set by the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants.
Rulebook for auditors.
Exactly. So the service auditor and the service organization must formally agree on several key terms, usually documented in that engagement letter. These include the clear objectives and scope, what exactly is being examined, the specific responsibilities of both the auditor and management, including that requirement for management to provide a written representation letter at the end. They must identify the criteria being used. Is it COSO for internal control, the trust services criteria, or something else?
The measuring stick.
The measuring stick, precisely. And crucially, there must be an explicit acknowledgement that the audit follows AICPA attestation standards and, importantly, recognizes the inherent limitations of any audit. This means acknowledging it provides reasonable assurance, not absolute certainty. It manages expectations.
Like the fine print.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, clarifies what the report does and doesn't guarantee. And of course, the auditor formally requests management's written assertion as part of this agreement. It's all documented and agreed upon up front.
You mentioned independence earlier, and you stressed how important it is. In any audit, really, but especially here where trust is paramount. If the auditor isn't truly independent of Cloud Secure, can anyone actually rely on that SOC report?
Absolutely, unequivocally not. Independence is the bedrock. It's completely non-negotiable. It's what ensures the auditor's objectivity, their impartiality, their ability to call things as they see them without bias. Without independence, the report is, frankly, worthless. Its credibility is shot.
So how do they ensure they are independent? What do they look at?
The process is pretty rigorous. Auditors have detailed independence rules they must follow. They assess several areas for potential conflicts that could impair their judgment. This includes looking at the scope of services they provide to Cloud Secure. Are they also, say, designing Cloud Secure security systems? That's a conflict. You can't audit your own work. They look at fee arrangements. Is the audit fee dependent on Cloud Secure getting a clean report? That's a huge no-no. Fees must be fixed and independent of the outcome. They scrutinize financial and business relationships. Does the audit firm, or do key members of the audit team, own stock in Cloud Secure? Do they have loans with Cloud Secure or other business ventures together? Any significant financial entanglement is usually prohibited.
Personal ties.
Yes, also familial relationships. Are close family members of the audit team in key positions at Cloud Secure where they could influence the audit subject matter? Like, is the lead auditor's spouse the CFO of Cloud Secure? That would compromise independence. It's about avoiding any situation where an objective observer might think the auditor's judgment could be swayed.
Okay, so the auditor must be independent of the main company, Cloud Secure. What about those subservice organizations, like DataHost?
That's a fantastic question, and it gets a little more complex there. The rule is the service auditor must be independent of the responsible party. Usually that's the service organization itself, Cloud Secure. But remember the inclusive method, where Cloud Secure includes DataHost controls within their own SOC report.
Yeah.
If they use the inclusive method, then data host management also becomes a responsible party for the information related to their controls presented in Cloud Secure's report. And because they're now a responsible party, the service auditor doing the audit for Cloud Secure must also be independent of data host.
Wow, so the independence net widens significantly.
It absolutely does.
Ah.
It means the auditor has to check for conflicts not just with their main client, but potentially with key vendors too, if those vendors are included in the report.
Mhm.
It maintains the integrity of the entire service delivery chain being reported on.
What happens if they just aren't independent? Is there any way forward?
It's very rare, but there's a specific rule for situations where, maybe due to law or regulation, an auditor is required to accept a job, even though they lack
Mm.
independence. Perhaps they're the only firm qualified in a remote area, or there's a specific government mandate. In that highly unusual case, the auditor cannot issue a standard opinion. They must disclaim an opinion. And in their report, they have to explicitly state that they are not independent. They don't have to say why, but if they choose to give reasons, they must list all the reasons. It's a bright red flag to anyone reading the report, signaling that the findings lack the assurance that comes from an independent review.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly to materiality. It sounds like accounting jargon, maybe a bit dry, but you emphasized it's crucial here. How does an auditor decide what's important enough or material in a SOC report for Cloud Secure? What does that really mean in this context?
You're right, it can sound technical, but the concept is absolutely vital. Materiality is all about significance. What information, if omitted or misstated, would actually matter to someone reading and relying on that SOC report? Would it change their decision?
So it's about impact on the user.
It's exactly impact on the user's decision-making. The service auditor must consider materiality when they're planning the audit, figuring out where the big risks are, and when they're performing their procedures, deciding how much evidence they need to gather. And it's not static. If they find something new during the audit that makes them think, whoa, this issue is actually a bigger deal than we initially thought, they must reassess materiality. It's a dynamic judgment throughout the engagement.
Does materiality mean the same thing for a SOC1 versus a SOC2?
Not quite. The focus shifts because the purpose of the reports is different. Think of it like a doctor. A cardiologist considers different symptoms material than, say, an orthopedist.
Okay, so how does it work for SOC1?
In a SOC1 engagement, remember, the focus is on controls relevant to financial reporting. So materiality primarily relates to the fair presentation of the description of the service organization's system. Is the description accurate and complete in ways that could affect a user's financial reporting? Here, materiality is often very qualitative, meaning, has important information been left out or twisted? Does the description truly paint an accurate picture of how Cloud Secure handles processes that impact their clients' financials? For example, if Cloud Secure processes payments and their description fails to mention a critical reconciliation control, that omission could be material because it might lead to financial errors for the client.
Got it. What about Type 2 reports where they test effectiveness?
For Type 2 SOC1 reports, when the auditor is testing the operating effectiveness of controls over time, materiality involves both quantitative and qualitative factors. Quantitative might be about the rate of control failures or deviations. If a control is supposed to work 100% of the time, but the auditor finds it failed 5 times out of 100 tests, is that 5% failure rate material? It depends on the control's importance.
And qualitative.
Qualitative looks at the nature and cause of those failures. Was it just a one-off human error? Or is it a sign of a systemic problem, like a software bug causing consistent failures? Even a few failures might be material if they reveal a fundamental weakness.
Can you give an example of something clearly material in SOC1?
Sure. Let's use example 1 from the sources. Imagine a service organization provides application hosting, but they rely heavily on underlying general IT controls, things like network security, server maintenance, user access rights. Their application controls simply cannot function properly without these foundational IT controls working.
Like building a house on sand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, those general IT controls would absolutely be considered material to the description of the service organization system. They must be included in the description and audited because their failure could undermine everything else. They're fundamentally significant.
Okay, that makes sense for SOC1's financial focus. How does materiality differ for SOC2 engagements, like the one Cloud Secure might get, focusing on things like security or availability?
For SOC, the lens shifts. Here, materiality relates more directly to the likelihood and magnitude of risks that could prevent Cloud Secure from meeting its service commitments, the promises it makes to customers, and system requirements, how the system needs to function to meet those promises, based on the selected trust services criteria. It also relates to whether the controls designed to mitigate those risks actually operated effectively.
So it's about risk to the service itself.
Precisely. It's a judgment call made by the auditor, heavily influenced by what they believe are the common information needs of the broad range of report users. The auditor asks, would a misstatement in Cloud Secure's system description or a failure in one of their security controls reasonably be expected to influence decisions made by typical users relying on this report?
Like deciding whether to trust Cloud Secure with their data.
Exactly. If Cloud Secure had a material weakness in their encryption controls, that would definitely influence a potential customer's decision. Now, there's a nuance. If the SOC2 report is restricted to a specific group of users, maybe just a few large enterprise clients, the auditor would focus materiality based on the potential effect on that specific group's decisions. It adapts to the audience.
Okay, so materiality flags the important stuff. What happens when the auditor actually finds problems during the audit, things that are potentially material? What are these issues called, and what do they really mean? It sounds like there are different ways things can go wrong.
You're absolutely right. Finding issues is a normal part of auditing. These findings are generally categorized as misstatements or deficiencies. And yes, there are different types, each indicating a different kind of problem. First, you might have a description misstatement. This is pretty straightforward. It's an error or an omission in that written description of Cloud Secure's system that management prepared. Maybe they said they used security tool X, but they actually used tool Y, or they completely left out a key step in their incident response plan. The description itself isn't accurate or complete.
The map doesn't match the territory.
Exactly. Then there's a deviation or exception. This happens when a control exists and is designed properly, but it failed to operate as intended in a specific instance tested by the auditor. Maybe Cloud Secure requires manager approval for all new user accounts, but the auditor found one instance where approval wasn't documented. It's a failure in execution for that specific test. A pattern of deviations often points to a deficiency.
Okay, so deviation is about execution failure. What about design flaws?
That leads us to a deficiency in the design. This is more fundamental. It means either a control that's necessary to meet an objective is completely missing, or the control that is in place is improperly designed. So even if everyone followed the poorly designed control perfectly, it still wouldn't effectively achieve the goal.
Like having a lock on the door, but the key is just left under the mat.
Perfect analogy. The control exists, the lock, but its design makes it ineffective. For Cloud Secure, maybe they have a change management process, but it doesn't require testing changes before they go live. That's a design deficiency.
And the last type?
That's a deficiency in the operating effectiveness. Here, the control is actually designed properly, but it consistently fails to operate as designed in practice. Or maybe the person performing the control isn't competent or doesn't have the necessary authority to do it effectively. The design is okay, but the execution is flawed repeatedly, or the person doing it isn't qualified.
So the lock is good, but nobody actually locks the door, or the person with the key doesn't know how to use it.
Precisely. Maybe Cloud Secure has a great policy for reviewing security logs weekly, but the reviews are consistently done late, or the person doing them doesn't actually know what to look for. That's an operating effectiveness deficiency.
Can these problems overlap?
Oh, absolutely. The auditor looks at all these issues together. A deficiency in design might lead to deviations in operation, and a misstatement in the description could hide an underlying deficiency. The auditor has to consider the combined effect.
Let's make this really concrete with that example, too, about Brown Core, the email hosting provider.
Right, Brown Core. Their description listed several controls: a secured server room with locks and a security system, backup power, and daily offsite backups. Good controls on paper.
Sounds reasonable.
During the audit, it was discovered that the security system mentioned in the description was never actually implemented. Big oops. So first, that's a clear description misstatement. The description said some things existed that didn't. Second, because the security system wasn't there, the controls to ensure email data was safely stored were compromised in their operation. So there's a deficiency in operating effectiveness. The overall goal of secure storage wasn't being met effectively because a key control was missing in action.
And it affects the design relevance, too.
Exactly. The described design included the security system. Without it, the remaining controls, like just having locks on the door, might not be sufficient on their own to provide adequate security. So the fact that this control wasn't implemented casts doubt on the overall suitability of the design as it was presented. One missing piece can unravel the whole picture, showing how interconnected these issues are. That's what the auditor is digging for.
We keep using the term the system. We talked about management describing it, the auditor examining it. But what is a system when we're talking specifically about a SOC2 engagement for Cloud Secure? Is it just their servers and software?
That's a really important clarification. In the SOC2 world, a system is defined much more broadly and holistically. It's not just the tech. It encompasses the infrastructure, software, people, procedures, and data, all 5 components working together.
Okay, 5 components.
Yes, 5. They're all designed, implemented, and operated by Cloud Secure to achieve specific business objectives, like providing reliable cloud storage according to the requirements they've set. It recognizes that technology needs people and processes to actually function and deliver value.
Can you break down those 5 components with examples for Cloud Secure?
Absolutely. Let's take them one by one. 1, infrastructure. This is the physical and virtual foundation. Think buildings, the actual data centers Cloud Secure uses, the server racks, the network switches routing traffic, the storage arrays holding the data, even things like the surveillance cameras monitoring the facility and the mobile devices employees might use to access the system. It's the tangible and virtualized hardware layer.
The nuts and bolts.
Pretty much. 2, software. This is all the programs and applications running on that infrastructure. It includes the operating systems, like Linux or Windows Server, middleware connecting different parts, the databases storing information, the web applications customers interact with, like Cloud Secure's online portal, any internal tools Cloud Secure uses, and even the code repositories and development tools used to build and maintain the software.
The brains of the operation.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
3, people. This is absolutely critical. Systems don't run themselves. This includes everyone involved, Cloud Secure's employees, any contractors they use, the managers overseeing things, the developers building the code, the sysadmins keeping servers running, the security analysts watching for threats, customer support reps helping users, even the end users interacting with the system. It's the human element.
The operators and users.
Yes, exactly. 4, data. This is the information itself being processed or stored by Cloud Secure. But it's also about the data. Things like data dictionaries, defining what different data fields mean, information about how data flows through the system, where it's stored, how it's backed up, how it's classified, grades, public, confidential. It's the entire information lifecycle.
The lifeblood.
Good way to put it. 5, procedures. These are the defined processes, both automated and manual, that govern how things get done. How does a new Cloud Secure customer get onboarded? How is a software update authorized and deployed? How are security incidents handled? How are backups performed and tested? These are the step-by-step instructions and workflows that ensure consistency and control.
The rule book for how things work.
Exactly. So a system in SOC2 is really this whole ecosystem, infrastructure, software, people, data, and procedures all working together.
Okay, that makes sense. It's the whole ecosystem. But a company like Cloud Secure probably has lots of different services, maybe different departments, using different parts of that ecosystem. How do they draw the line? How do they define the boundaries of the specific system being audited in this SOC engagement? It feels like it could get fuzzy.
It could absolutely get fuzzy, which is why defining clear system boundaries is essential. These boundaries must be clearly defined by management and then communicated to the people reading the report. The boundaries specify which particular aspects of Cloud Secure's overall infrastructure, software, people, procedures, and data are included in the scope of this specific SOC report because they are necessary to provide the specific services being covered by the report.
So you audit the service, not the whole company necessarily.
Precisely. Even if Cloud Secure uses the same network infrastructure for multiple services, the boundaries for a SOC2 report on their Secure Health Data Vault service might be drawn differently than for their general basic file sync service, including different procedures or specialized personnel, for instance.
Can you give some examples of how boundaries might differ?
Sure. If we were talking about a system primarily focused on financial reporting, more like SOC1, the boundaries would likely encompass the components involved in initiating, authorizing, recording, processing, and reporting financial transactions. It would be tightly focused on the financial flow.
Makes sense.
If the focus was on processing integrity for Cloud Secure, ensuring data is processed accurately and completely, the boundaries might need to extend further. They might pull in parts of their risk management function, internal audit, specific IT operations teams, maybe even call center scripts if they handle transaction corrections, because all those could impact the integrity of processing.
A wider net for that one?
Potentially, yes. And if the SOC2 report is specifically covering confidentiality or privacy, the boundaries tend to be quite broad. They'd likely cover all system components involved in the entire life cycle of confidential or personal information, from how Cloud Secure collects it to how it's used, stored, accessed, disclosed, and ultimately destroyed. This includes formal policies and potentially informal ad hoc procedures if they handle sensitive data. It's about protecting that specific type of data wherever it flows within the defined service.
Okay, so companies like Cloud Secure make promises, service commitments to their customers. Your data is confidential. Our service will be available X% of the time. How do these promises connect to what the standards call system requirements? Sounds like one flows from the other.
They are very tightly linked. You
Yeah.
can think of service commitments as the what Cloud Secure promises to deliver.
Hmm.
System requirements are the how the system needs to be built and operated to actually deliver on those promises.
What and how? Got it.
So the auditor evaluates Cloud Secure's internal controls against the chosen trust services criteria, security, availability, etc., to see if those controls provide reasonable assurance that Cloud Secure is achieving its business objectives. These objectives fall into a few key buckets.
Okay, like what?
Primarily, achieving the service commitments made to user entities. These are the explicit promises. For Cloud Secure, it could be guaranteeing a specific algorithm is used for data analysis, stating specific system availability hours, like 247 except for planned maintenance, publishing their password complexity standards, or defining the specific encryption standards used for customer data at rest. These commitments often align directly with the trust services criteria being reported on.
So promises linked to security, availability, etc.
Exactly. Second, the objectives relate to ensuring compliance with relevant laws and regulations. Cloud Secure needs to ensure their system operates according to rules like HER, GDPR, or whatever applies to their service and data.
Staying legal.
Right. And third, there might be other internal objectives Cloud Secure has for the system, maybe related to efficiency or internal performance goals, that they also build controls around.
Okay, so those are the objectives. How do system requirements fit in?
The system requirements define how the system must function technically and operationally to meet those service commitments, comply with laws, and achieve those other objectives. They are the specific rules and configurations. For Cloud Secure, examples might be a requirement for fingerprinting and background checks for all employees with access to sensitive data, maybe driven by banking regulations, or specific system edits programmed into their software to restrict invalid data entry, or a policy dictating that logical access reviews must happen at least every 60 days, or data tagging standards they follow based on industry best practices, or specific business processing rules mandated by regulations like IPA for handling patient information. These are the concrete specifications the system must adhere to.
That breakdown helps clarify the what versus the how. Do you have another example, maybe like that CompuGain one, to really make this tangible? How a specific promise leads to specific system requirements.
Absolutely. Let's revisit CompuGain Inc., the payment processor. Their customer, Retail Extra Co., specifically chose them because CompuGain committed to maintaining high standards of consumer privacy when processing payments. That's the high-level service commitment tied to the Privacy Trust Services criterion.
Okay, the promise is privacy.
Right. Now, because Retail Extra cares deeply about privacy, they ensure their service level agreement, SLA, with CompuGain outlines specific stipulations, which are essentially system requirements CompuGain must meet. For instance, the SLA might state, CompuGain will obtain a customer's explicit consent before processing a payment and transferring information. That's a specific procedural requirement. CompuGain will provide a concise privacy notice to the customer at the point of purchase before the transaction completes. Another specific procedural requirement. CompuGain will respond to privacy-related inquiries from Retail Extra's customers about past transactions within a defined time frame, say 10 business days, a specific performance requirement.
Okay, so the broad commitment privacy gets broken down into very specific, measurable actions the system and the people must take.
Exactly. It translates the promise into auditable requirements. The auditor can then test, did CompuGain get consent beforehand? Is the privacy notice displayed? Are they responding to inquiries within 10 days? It makes the commitment concrete and verifiable.
So, management at Cloud Secure makes these commitments, defines these requirements. How does the auditor make sure these aren't just vague marketing speak? How do they assess if the commitments and requirements are actually suitable and disclosed clearly enough for users?
That's a really important check the auditor performs. Management is responsible for achieving the commitments, yes, but also for disclosing the principal ones clearly in the system description. The disclosure needs to be good enough so that someone reading the SOC2 report can actually understand the relationship between the controls Cloud Secure has implemented, the promises commitments they've made, and the underlying system requirements, the how.
Avoiding ambiguity.
Right, the auditor considers. Are the service commitments described with enough detail? Does Cloud Secure saying we provide robust security actually get broken down into specifics like we use AES 256 encryption for data at rest and TLS 1.2 for data in transit? Vague statements aren't good enough.
Need specifics.
Absolutely. Also, if the report is for a general audience, does the description focus on the principal commitments relevant to most users? Or does it get lost in the weeds of highly specific promises made only to one or two clients? It needs to be relevant. And beyond just listing controls, does the description provide enough detail about how each control operates so that a user entity, like one of Cloud Secure's customers, can understand how that control might affect their own processes or risk assessments?
So the user can see how it impacts them.
Exactly. It's about providing clear, actionable information, not just a checklist of promises. The auditor evaluates whether management's description achieves that clarity and suitability.
Okay, let's talk risk. Every company faces risks, cyber threats, internal errors, natural disasters. How does a service organization like Cloud Secure specifically identify and assess their risks in the context of preparing for its SOC engagement? What are they looking for?
Risk assessment is absolutely fundamental for the service organization itself, even before the auditor gets involved. Management needs to proactively identify and assess the types of risks, the likelihood of those risks occurring, and the potential impact if they do occur. They need to consider risks that could affect the accuracy of their system description, the suitability of their control designs, and for Type 2, the ongoing effectiveness of their controls.
So what could go wrong, how likely is it, and how bad would it be?
That's the essence of it. How Cloud Secure identifies and manages these risks directly impacts their ability to meet their service commitments. If they don't have a good handle on their risks, their controls might be focused on the wrong things.
What kinds of risks are typical here?
They fall into several categories: intentional and unintentional acts, both internal and external. This is broad. Think external hackers trying to breach Cloud Secure's network, but also an internal employee accidentally misconfiguring a server or falling for a phishing email. Both internal and external threats, deliberate or accidental. Known threats, vulnerabilities, or deficiencies. This is about specific weaknesses Cloud Secure is already aware of, maybe from internal testing or past incidents. An unpatched software vulnerability, a weak point in their physical security. Using subservice organizations, we talked about this. Relying on data host introduces third-party risk. If data host has an outage or a security breach, it directly impacts Cloud Secure and its customers. Managing vendor risk is huge. Type of personnel with system access. Insider risk. Do they have appropriate background checks or sensitive roles? Is access based on least privilege? Is access monitored? A malicious or negligent insider can cause significant damage. Lack of expected user controls, CUECs, or subservice organization controls, CSOCs. Sometimes, Cloud Secure's controls rely on their customers, user entities, doing certain things, like using strong passwords. These are complementary user entity controls, or CUBCs. Or they rely on their vendor, subservice organization, having certain controls, CSOCs. If those complementary controls aren't in place or aren't effective, it increases Cloud Secure's risk. It's about the shared responsibility model.
Okay, those are risks the organization actively looks for. What about those inherent risks you mentioned earlier, the background factors that just make things riskier even before controls?
Right, inherent risks are the underlying conditions or factors present in Cloud Secure's environment that make misstatements or control failures more likely. Even before you consider the specific controls they've put in place, they're part of the context. Key factors include changes in the operating environment. Think new laws like GDPR suddenly appearing. Cloud Secure has to adapt, creating risk during the transition. New personnel. Hiring new staff, especially for roles involving manual controls, naturally increases the risk of errors while they're learning the ropes. New or revamped IT systems. Rolling out a major new platform or significantly upgrading an old one is inherently risky. Things can break, configurations can be missed. Rapid growth. If Cloud Secure suddenly doubles its customer base, can its existing controls handle the load? Rapid growth often strains resources and process. New technology. Adopting bleeding-edge tech might offer benefits, but it also brings unknown risks and might work differently than expected. New business models or products. Launching a totally new service might divert focus and resources from existing core services, potentially weakening controls there. Corporate restructurings, mergers, acquisitions, major reorganizations, these disrupt reporting lines, responsibilities, and can lead to loss of key personnel or expertise. Expanded foreign operations. Operating internationally brings complexity, different laws, cultures, security challenges in each region, new accounting standards for SOC 1 relevant. Implementing new financial rules requires changes to systems and processes, creating risk of errors impacting clients. Changes in economic conditions. An economic downturn might force cost-cutting, potentially impacting security investments or staffing levels, increasing risk.
So lots of background factors that can just naturally elevate the risk profile.
Exactly. Management needs to be aware of these inherent risks as part of their overall assessment.
Okay, so that's the service organization's view of risk. Now, how does the service auditor approach risk assessment? What procedures do they perform to get their own independent view of the risks at Cloud Secure?
The service auditor must perform their own risk assessment procedures. They can't just take management's word for it. Their goal is to get enough understanding to identify and assess the risks of material misstatement independently. This assessment then forms the basis for designing their audit tests.
And what are those risks of material misstatement specifically?
For both Type 1 and Type 2 reports, the risks fall into those three main buckets we discussed earlier. 1. The risk that management system description isn't fairly presented. 2. The risk that the controls aren't suitably designed. 3. And for Type 2, the risk that the controls didn't operate effectively. The auditor is looking for potential problems in any of those areas that could be material.
How do they gain the understanding needed to assess these risks?
They need to get a deep understanding of Cloud Secure's system, including the controls. This includes understanding Cloud Secure's own processes for how they prepared the system description and decided on control objectives, how they identified the relevant controls, how they assessed the suitability of those controls' design, and, for Type 2, how they monitor and assess operating effectiveness themselves.
Understanding the company's own control processes.
Yes, including understanding the role and activities of Cloud Secure's internal audit function, if they have one. What do they do? How independent are they? Can their work be leveraged?
What specific techniques or procedures does the auditor use?
They use a combination of techniques. Inquiries, asking targeted questions of management, governance, like the board or audit committee, IT staff, security personnel, anyone relevant. Observation, watching processes happen in real time. Observing how Cloud Secure handles server patching or how physical access to the data center is controlled. Inspection, examining documents, records, reports, system logs, network diagrams, contracts with clients, internal policies, etc. Lots of reading and reviewing evidence. Reperformance, this is key. The auditor might independently reperform a control procedure themselves to see if it works as described and achieves the intended result, like trying to log in with an expired password to test access controls. For SOC2, reading other reports. Reviewing reports from regulators or other specialists about Cloud Secure can provide additional context or flag potential issues.
Do they trace transactions?
Yes, often they'll perform walkthroughs. They'll select a transaction or process like a new user setup or a data backup cycle and trace it from beginning to end through Cloud Secure's system, examining the controls at each step. It helps them understand the flow and confirm controls are placed where management says they are. These procedures might happen alongside tests of the system description or control effectiveness.
And are they specifically looking for fraud?
Absolutely. A crucial part of the auditor's risk assessment is performing procedures specifically designed to identify risks related to fraud or non-compliance with laws and regulations. This means actively considering how fraud could occur. Could management override controls? Could assets, like data, be stolen? Could records be falsified? They maintain professional skepticism and look for red flags related to intentional wrongdoing, not just accidental errors.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground today.
Yeah.
Seriously deep dive, from that initial handshake formal agreement on responsibilities, all the way through the nitty-gritty of risk assessment, materiality. It's crystal clear that SOC engagements are complex, definitely, but just so vital for building trust in this digital age.
They really are. A complex but necessary piece of the puzzle.
We've seen the very distinct roles management and the auditor play management doing that heavy lifting up front, the auditor providing that independent verification. We've touched on the differences between SOC 1, 2, 3, Type 1 versus Type 2, and really hammered home the importance of independence and figuring out what truly matters, what's material.
It's a rigorous framework designed to provide meaningful assurance.
So what does this all boil down to for you, the listener? Why should you care about SOC reports?
Yeah.
Well, it means when you use an online service, whether it's Cloud Secure storing your files or your bank processing your transactions or your email provider, there's likely a detailed, systematic process happening behind the scenes.
A process designed to ensure their systems are trustworthy.
Exactly. These reports, yeah, they're technical, but ultimately they're about accountability. Transparency. They give other businesses, and indirectly, they give you confidence that the services you rely on are being handled with diligence, with integrity, with real security and privacy measures in place. It's about assurance that your digital footprint is reasonably protected.
Translating that technical complexity into a basis for trust.
Totally. So next time you see a company mention their SOC 2 compliance or flash that badge on their website, maybe pause for a second. Think about the intense planning, the risk assessments, the detailed testing by independent auditors that likely went into earning that.
It's definitely not just a rubber stamp.
Not at all. It's a testament to a demanding process designed to safeguard information and uphold trust, which kind of makes you wonder, what other seals of approval or certifications do you rely on every day? Maybe for the food you eat, the car you drive, your financial advisor. How much do you really know about the rigor or lack thereof behind those assurances?
That's a great question. We often take these things for granted.
We do. It's a reminder that understanding how complex systems, whether technical or otherwise, are verified and secured often requires digging into the details, doing a deep dive, just like we did today.
And hopefully making that complexity a bit more understandable.
That's the goal. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of SOC engagements. We genuinely hope you feel a bit more informed, maybe a bit more curious about those hidden layers of security and assurance that keep our digital world spinning.
Keep asking questions.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.